This country is divided over who to follow, as if those are the only two options. Today we look at the wisdom of following a new kind of leader. Stay tuned. I remember a mentor of mine way back when I was first starting in ministry, and he had a group of fellow potential pastors there, and he said, now watch out. He said, there's going to be 3 temptations that all leaders face in ministry, or anyone who has any level of authority. One is the temptation to abuse your power. The other is the temptation to abuse your power to get money, greed, and the other is sex. Now, when you think about the evening news, power, money, sex, those are what leaders fall temptation to very often. You know, King David abused his power. Uriah, he used his power to murder Uriah so he could have Bathsheba. Apparently, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as they say, because Solomon also abuses his power, money, and sex. All 3. Not just 2, but all 3. But he didn't start out that way. In our story here, remember, he's a young person, and he asks for God's grace to help him with his leadership, and God is gracious to give him wisdom to help this poor, powerless sex worker, because that's what she was, get justice. Do you see the irony here? Huh? By the end of his life, Solomon had cut his nation in half. Israel is cut into 2 nations because of his lust for more money, more power, and the other one. Huh? I mean, we see the wisdom here in the dividing of the baby story, but how could such a wise person turn out to be such a terrible leader? By the end of the story, not unlike his father David, he leaves the kingdom of Israel divided in shambles. A civil war breaks out. So the story of Solomon, frankly, is a confusing story about wisdom. But it is an accurate picture of what power does to our wonderful and terrible natures. The problem the Bible presents is that we are both good, that we know both good and evil. We are saints and sinners all the way down to the bone. That was one of Luther's great insights. Sinners and saints, all the way through. How wise of Luther to see that, huh? You know, today is Reformation Sunday, and our great leader, good Lutherans, was Martin Luther. And not unlike Solomon, God gave him wisdom that came out, frankly, of the abuse of the church. Wisdom as it relates to the power of grace. He saw how the church of the day had abused their power. At the heart of that abuse was not grace, but religious rules, right? It gave the church power over people because now they had to play by the rules of the church, or guess where they were going? They had tremendous power over the lives of people. They abused their authority over people. And that power made the people poorer. It exploited them. You know where the money for indulgences went? It went to build St. Peter's. I've been to St. Peter's. Wow, magnificent. The artwork, Michelangelo and all that. You know that was built on the backs of poor people. Common people. Solomon did the same thing. You know how he built a temple for God? He did it through slavery. He enslaved his own people and raised their tax level so high they couldn't possibly. And that's why they rebelled. He enslaved his own people in the name of God. Luther, because of God's grace, did a wonderful thing, but he also did some horrible things. Like spreading the disease of anti-Semitism. Huh? You know that? We don't like to know that, but Luther was anti-Semitic. And this cancer reached its peak during the Holocaust. Now, I'm not saying Luther was responsible for the Holocaust, but he certainly didn't help this great German leader, this great German figure. One of the heroes of my evangelical past. If those of us who are old enough, how many of us remember Billy Graham? Come on. Yeah. And recently they uncovered him in a lie. You know, Nixon taped everything, right? And he's having a conversation with Nixon, and you know what they found out? Billy Graham was telling Nixon, now Hitler went about it wrong with the Jewish question. What he did was terrible. But he got the problem is that Jewish people have too much power. We need to do something about that in our country. Billy Graham! He's one of my heroes, and he still is, but he was a human being. He was wonderful, and he was terrible. Now, later on in his life, he saw the errors of his ways, but he did a lot of wonderful things and some really terrible things. Power does interesting things to our wonderful, terrible natures. And so to deal with it, we deal with it by wanting to believe that maybe the next leader won't fail us. Huh? Maybe it's the next one who won't be so terrible in their wonderfulness. In a Bible study, we were talking about how we put pastors on pedestals. Come on. We do. At least that's the temptation for older generations. I think we do that, and I've done that. Well, until I became one. Because in part, any pastor with enough self-awareness will know they are wonderful and terrible all the way to the bone. They are, just like, because we're human beings like the rest of y'all. And so people just hope. We hope there's someone that not like us, because we know we're wonderful and terrible to the bone. We know that. We just hope there's someone not like us. Well, guess what? I won't ask how many of you have been disappointed by a pastor. Because pastors wear white robes and talk about God. Well, they must be more than we are. No, they're not. Hopefully, you need to have a baseline of integrity, yes, but they're just people who have been touched by grace, hopefully, and then want to model that grace for people. I've known a lot of pastors. And they're wonderful and they're terrible just like the rest of us. And how do I know that? Because I'm married. Huh? Pastors are sinners and saints just like the rest of us. Just like you. But we want to kind of deal with that because we want to believe there's someone not wonderful and terrible all the way to the bone, so we hope that maybe the next person will come along and fix it. Or we just learn to make the best of it because we assume that's our only option. Huh? If all you got is wonderful and terrible, well, I don't know if I should go with this person or with that person, and we kind of weigh the options and we just do the best we can with those options. Hopefully, folks, we've learned not to get too enthusiastic about the next great leader because they let us down. Come on. They do. So we hedge our bets. So it's wiser, perhaps, that we keep our wits about us, right? Once we were on some people and we were on our way to a conference or whatever, and so we were hungry and we pulled over on a rest stop at Green Bay or a rest area, or not a rest area, we were on an exit and we're looking for a restaurant and we're driving and there were very, very few options. So we pulled over to this one because we were tired of driving around and we pulled in and it was terrible. They burnt my corned beef hash, I'll never forget. So we got back in the car and all of us are disappointed as we passed the next exit. I saw my favorite restaurant. If I had known that I had more options, I would have waited for the better option. Often we do that with leadership. We think, well, that's our only options. Well, what if there's more choices than that? So watch this now. Our wonderful, terrible leaders are not our only option because in Jesus Christ we have a leader who will not fail us. Have you ever wondered why Christ had to be a human being? Right? It just seems like that Christmas holds a whole lot of business to, God to go through that and make sure that, we have the right human being born. Because you know why God had to be a human being? Because God gave us dominion. Genesis says God gave us dominion. In other words, we're We're in control. We're the stewards of this planet. And so if God's going to lead us out, he's not going to take that power away. He's not going to take our choices away. He just sends a better leader to lead us through that. It has to be a human being, because God won't take away the stewardship he gave us. God is not in control. We are. But God exercises his control through a human being, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, working through his grace in us. But unlike the leaders of this world, Christ refuses violence. He will not take away our choices. So we must choose, if we have the faith to follow his approach, or follow the approach of our terrible, wonderful leaders who get us all rallied up, get us all fired up, and then terrible things happen. Christ shows that the way to navigate our terrible wonderfulness is through forgiveness and grace and nonviolence, rather than resentments and rules and violence. And he convinces us by giving us forgiveness and grace and freedom. You see, you will not be convinced of that until you've experienced it for yourself. Wonderful, terrible leaders are not the only option. And so this means, good Lutherans on Reformation Day, that we are in a constant state of reformation as we learn how to follow a different leader. The Bible shows us the terrible wonderfulness of leaders in the Bible. Why does it do that? You ever notice how brutally honest the Bible is with its leaders? They are wonderful when they use their power correctly, but then they use their power terribly. And you know why the Bible shows that? So that we might start to long for a better leader. Martin Luther uncovered the abusive control of religious rules coming from the religious leaders of his day. He experienced that personally. He saw how poor people were bankrupting themselves, trying to get their dead relatives out of purgatory. Is that an abuse of power or what? Martin Luther was someone who successfully challenged the abuse of systemic power in his day. And you do know the church wanted to cut Luther in two. They did. He sought to reform the church toward grace and away from the abuse of power. And the church said, we're not having any of that. When Christ is your leader, you are always asking, okay, what if I have been told by my wonderful, terrible culture leaders? What would Christ say about that? And then we have to have the gumption to question those in authority. Otherwise, how can we have a reformation? We wouldn't have had a reformation if Luther had not been willing to do that. We are in a constant state of reformation as we learn how to follow a different leader. So real wisdom, therefore, is to follow the wisest leader. Isn't that smart? Let's follow the wisest leader. So which is wiser? You tell me. Resentment or forgiveness? Which is wiser? Forgiveness, come on. Which is wiser? Violent solutions or nonviolent solutions? Nonviolent solutions. Which is wiser? The love of power or the power of love? Folks, we have a leader who modeled the power of forgiveness, the power of nonviolence, the power of love. So, God, may we experience the grace that moves us beyond resentment, beyond violence, beyond a love of power. May we live out the call of our baptism.